You're watching Pyro Media Network.
We just keep on walking, but never really getting nowhere. It's like we keep on talking, but never really saying nothing. On different sides, on different times, stuck in a ways we ain't changing. Can't read your mind, and I've really tried. You won't let me in like we're strangers. Say opposites, supposed to attract, but we both can tell it feels often. Should let it go, but somehow we fold, and it happens way too often. We're so different, we're so different. How can we ever agree, make it fit in? It's just like we're so different, we're so different. I don't quite understand you, you don't get me. It's just like we're blinded.
Thank you for tuning in. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We hope your experience is fruitful. Please feel free to visit our website to find out how you can join our growing family. While we are loading your experience, please do us a quick favor and hit that like button from whichever platform you're watching or listening on. Also, share so others may enjoy as well. And we hope you would consider hitting that subscribe or follow button so you can check out more of our amazing content. All right, let's start the show.
Do you remember when your mom used to say, everybody ain't your friend? Now, tonight's show is not going to be about attacking white women. It's about examining proximity, performance, and power. Welcome back to Tammy's Take. Let's start the show. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I've missed you. I hope you had a great week. Okay, so this week I had a very interesting week, and I want to be very clear about why this show is happening today or tonight, whenever you see the show. And I want to talk about an experience I had. And tonight's show is it's not about something that's subtle. It's not violent. It's not loud, but it's very, very revealing. It's about what happens when inclusion becomes branding and friendship becomes proximity to Blackness without responsibility to it. So on yesterday, I had an introduction made by a mutual of mine, a friend. And my friend is really good about if he thinks I should be on somebody's stage, somebody's podcast, or I should be the chief consultant in somebody's office or somebody's organization, he's going to make the introduction. And we love him for that. And so he had made what I expected to be just kind of a random introduction to a group of women. And at first I thought I was being introduced to both women. So he told me that he had introduced a woman for one of his shows. He has a podcast show. And the woman also had a podcast show with a Black woman. It's a white woman with a Black woman that also do a podcast show. And for the purpose of this conversation, I won't say the name of the podcast because I want the conversation to be broader than what happened. And so he made the introduction in my email, and I got the introduction, and I would say roughly maybe a few hours later, the woman, we're going to call her Denise. Denise replied and said, "Hello, Tammy. Very nice to meet you. I would love to get on a Zoom with you, have a conversation with you, learn a little bit about you and what you do to see if you'd be a really good fit for the podcast." So I agreed, scheduled a time for Wednesday at 5:00. We get on the Zoom. Now, the way that I operate meetings, especially if I'm the one initiating contact with you, the way that I'm going to operate that meeting is if I say, "Hey, Kwame, I'd like to interview you for my show. I'd like to get to know you. Would you mind setting up a time with me, maybe 15 to 30 minutes, just so we understand who we each are. I can tell you a little bit about my show, why I want you on the show, why I think you'd be a great guest. And Kwame says, sure, I'd love to meet with you. Now, when I get on that meeting, because I am the one trying to get Kwame on my show, when that meeting starts, it's going to start something like this. Hi, Kwame. So very nice to meet you. So thank you so much for taking time out to meet with me today. I want to tell you a little bit about who I am, about what the show is, and why I think you'd be a great guest on the show. Now, Kwame, if he's a normal human being, and he's a normal human being, would say to me, I'd love to learn a little bit about you, right? And so then I would give him my spiel. I would tell him my name. I would tell him I wrote the book, The Empathy Gap. It is Black and White. I would tell him I developed an empathy scorecard, and my mission and my purpose is spreading empathy and getting people to engage in empathy. And I created tools around this thing called empathy. I have the empathy scorecard. I have the self-empathy scorecard. And of course, I wrote a book about empathy, right? So he would know, oh, okay, so your show centers around empathy. So the stories you tell will be in that vein about how you can take something that's tragic or how you can learn and how you can grow in your empathy. So Kwame would have an idea about why I'm asking him to come on my show. Now that's how my brain thinks. Okay. So we get on the Zoom, and Denise says to me as if she's interviewing me. Now, it's very important to know that Denise is a white woman. I am a Black woman. And I'm going to talk about the very subtle ways that whiteness exerts power and dominance, even in ways that you're not even thinking about, even in ways that you're not considering. But as a Black person on the opposite side of power, in the way that we have to be in this country, we are always keenly aware when power is being wielded against us, whether that is overt or subtle. Now, if you're listening to me talk, and you go, "Oh my God," it's be thankful that your brain doesn't even have to process the way that power is being wielded against you, and that in itself is a privilege. So Denise comes onto the Zoom, and Denise says to me, "So tell me about yourself." And I'm taken back by this because Denise is trying to book guests on her podcast. Denise is trying to get people. So I would think Denise would tell me about her podcast, tell me a little bit about herself, and why she may or may not be interested, or the kind of guests she's looking to have on the podcast, because this is her podcast vein. This is what they talk about. This is what they do. So I'm a bit thrown by that. So I said, okay, sure, but tell me a little bit about you. Tell me a little bit about the podcast. I said, how do you know my friend? And we're going to call my friend John. How do you know John? I said, because John introduces me to a lot of people, but I'm not sure how you know John. So tell me a little bit about how you know John. Tell me a little bit about the podcast. Tell me a little bit about you. So what Denise was doing in that moment was making me perform for a seat on the podcast. Although, if you have a podcast, the goal is to get seats on the podcast. So I say that to Denise, and she says, oh, well, we started this podcast kind of in the pandemic when things kind of got shut down, and I started it with my bestie. It kind of just started out where she would call me and say, hey, why do white people do this? And I would call her and say, hey, what does it mean when Black people do that? And so we just decided that, maybe we should start recording these conversations. Okay. So now I know a little bit about the podcast, but I still don't know anything about Denise and why she thinks it's important for these conversations to be taped. That aside. So I go into my bit of my spiel, and I tell her who I am. I tell her about my products. I tell her about my book. I tell her about my consultancy work. And I say to her that I, like a lot of Black women who worked in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, like a lot of us, we found ourselves either unemployed or severely underemployed when the current administration came into power because of the assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she said, absolutely. I said, so since that time when the presidency happened and I had a little bit of downtime is when I decided to write my book because I had time to be a little bit more creative. And I said, my book explores the very ways in which white people have been socialized and conditioned out of empathy for Black people. And that the way that I approached diversity, equity, and inclusion when I was in the space was from the lens of empathy, because fundamentally, not a lot has changed for Black people, specifically Black people, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, because the people with the power to change anything for us do not and have never really had empathy for us. And unless you have empathy for the people you are trying to help, your help becomes performative. It becomes something that you do to appear to be good people, appear to be inclusive people, but it's not work that actually moves society forward, and more importantly, moves Black people forward within the workspace. So I'm saying this to her. And whenever I'm talking to white people, more specifically white women, about conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I am subtly watching for their cues and what the things that their body is doing, right? And those of us who do consultancy work, who do culture work, who do management training, we learn very early to read body language more than anything else. Because when you go into organizations, when you go into corporations and you're doing culture assessments, which is what my consultancy did, what employees will not say in words, they will say in their body language. And they're always communicating. So I'm watching this woman's body language and it's very stiff. Now, without naming the podcast and saying who this person is, because that's not the purpose of the show, I will tell you that the podcast specifically is dealing around diversity, right? So this is a white woman with a Black co-host with a podcast dealing in all things diversity. And I'm saying this to her, and there's nothing in her body. The body language is very stiff. It's very off. So I make a note of that. So after I give her my spiel, because fundamentally she was exerting power in that moment that I had to perform for why I needed to be on her podcast, right? Although I think at this point, when you're first starting a podcast, when you're first starting a talk show, you book the guests you can get until you get the guests that you want. Okay. I don't have a problem with that, right? So if I just happen to be the guest you can get until you get the guests that you want, that's fine. I may be introduced to your audience in a way that they haven't seen before. So I'm not opposed to going on people's podcasts, whether they are known or not known. So after I give her my spiel, she says, well, I will have my assistant send you an email to schedule a time. Let me know what's on your calendar to schedule a time to schedule the podcast. She said, and we ask that you block out like an hour and a half to be able to tape so that we can edit and kind of just have a free flowing conversation. She says all of this. So then she's getting ready to jump off the Zoom call. Now, another thing to note, she had scheduled the Zoom call or blocked out the Zoom call for 30 minutes, right? Which is standard, right? Like if I'm trying to get to know you, or somebody's trying to get to know a little bit about you, you want to have some time, not just to have the conversation about who people are, but just to kind of have a free flowing conversation to see if there's chemistry. Because if you're going to have somebody on your podcast, or you want to have somebody on your show, you want to be able to know whether or not that they can freely flow in conversation, especially because the podcast is a free flowing podcast. So you don't get advanced questions. There isn't a set questions. They set it up to be very free flowing. So if your podcast is free flowing, why wouldn't you want to spend time with a potential guest to see if in conversation it is in fact free flowing? You block out 30 minutes and you're trying to get off this Zoom within 10. So I'm making note of that as well, especially after she says, we don't send scripted questions. It's a free flowing podcast. And I'm thinking, so are we going to banter here? Are you going to find Do we have like this rhythm between us? Now, I'm not interviewing, and I say interviewing loosely, but this is what it feels like. Now, I'm not meeting the second co host, which is the Black woman. I'm only meeting the white woman, which again feels like a power play because this is y'all's podcast. I won't just be talking to you, I will also be talking to her. Why do you not think, if you're going to be booking guests, you both should be interviewing the guest or potential guests to see if you both have a natural chemistry with that guest so that you produce a good podcast? Make note of that too. I'm meeting with you. I'm not meeting with your co-host, the Black woman. Okay. So she's trying to get off this call with me. And I say to her, she says, well, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah. I said, I still don't know what you do. I said, I know a little bit about what you said with the podcast is, but I don't know what it is you, in fact, do. Is the podcast your business? Is the podcast the only thing that you do? I do this show, Tammy Takes. Tammy Takes is not the only thing that I do. I also run a consultancy. I also do mentoring and coaching. I also am the author of the book. I am also the creator of the empathy scorecards, and I market and sell that. So I don't just do Tammy Take. So I said, do you only do the podcast? What do you do? And this is the point of the conversation where, had I been another white woman, I think my chest and my face would have gotten red from anger. It wasn't just indifference, it was anger. So she says, oh, we're just going to say she's an executive, top tier executive at a corporation. And as a top tier executive, she has both hiring and firing power. Okay. So she said, so that's my role at the company that I am at. And she said, before that, I worked as a chief diversity officer. Now, what was interesting about this was, as I was giving her my spiel and I was telling her that I don't think that the diversity, equity, and inclusion has been meaningful for Black people in any way. It hasn't progressed in any way. It has not improved since its inception. And partly, I believe the reason why that has been the case is because 85% of the diversity, equity, and inclusion roles were held by white people, white women, and white men. Now, I said this to her prior to knowing she herself worked as a chief diversity officer. So she tells me the job that she does at the current company, big executive with both hiring and firing power. Then she tells me that she worked previously, before this new administration came in, she also worked as a diversity officer. And much like a lot of us, Black women, and white men, those roles went away. Now, interestingly about those roles going away, I think we all know who landed on their feet and which group did not. So all of the white women and men who were, and I don't say this loosely, I say this very directly, cosplaying chief diversity officers in organizations, all landed either with better jobs or equivalent jobs. And all the Black people, more specifically, the Black women, have been underemployed or full out unemployed. And I'm talking about going on 1 to 2 years of underemployment or unemployed. Then she says, now as she's telling me about her previous chief diversity officer role, she also tells me that she too is a consultant. And I will tell you, as a Black woman in the consultancy space around company culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, getting clients, sourcing clients, getting meetings is like running down the street on fire. That's how hard it is. Meanwhile, it has been my experience that white people, more specifically white women, can get an LLC tomorrow, which is Friday, and by Tuesday have clients on their book, because whiteness responds to whiteness. Again, this is about performance, proximity, and power. It responds to whiteness. So she says, and I did consultancy, and I still have my consultancy, but I also have this job. Another thing to note, that a lot of white women and white men get the luxury of having a consultancy while being full-time employed somewhere and still having the ability to go back and forth between consulting and being a regular employee. So as she's telling me this, she's also dropping notable companies in this conversation. Notable, like companies we've heard of, companies we know. And so I'm thinking she's thinking I should be impressed by this. And I'm not. My face is just kind of neutral about this. And then she says this. And then she says, but my friend, my bestie, we're going to call her, the white woman is Denise, we're going to call her bestie Kim. But my best friend Kim, unfortunately, like a lot of Black women, she was a chief diversity officer herself. And like a lot of Black women, she is no longer employed. Now we have 2 diversity professionals. Political shift happens. One lands in an executive role with the ability to both hire and fire. One is unemployed, and they call each other best friends. Let's repeat that. 2 diversity professionals. Political shift happens. One lands as an executive with the ability to both hire and fire. One is unemployed, and they call each other best friends. And these best friends have a podcast discussing all things diversity. What does friendship require when the power is uneven? What does allyship look like when resources are uneven? What does love look like when one of you lands softly and the other does not? So she says this to me, and I'm sitting there thinking, you just told me you have the ability to hire and fire, and your bestie is unemployed. We're going to take a commercial break, and then we're going to come back to what I really felt about that I did not say.
Hey, how y'all doing? Real quick, this is Daryl Walter, host of the Daryl Walter Show. I know. And you are watching Pyro Media Network.
Hey, it's Dr. Nicole D. Vick from Dr. Victorious, and you're watching Pyro Media Network.
Bring it up.
is Pastor Kim from It's Just Kim Live Show, and you're watching Pyro Media Network.
Welcome back to the show. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. So she tells me that her bestie is unemployed after she told me she's in an executive level position to both hire and fire. And I, at that moment, was relieved that we were getting off the Zoom, because I don't know that our conversation would have been kind or fruitful after that. And I wanted to be very careful about that, because I was introduced to this person by somebody I both love and respect. And I don't know what their either personal or business relationship was. And I didn't want to jeopardize that. So we get off, and I am angry. And I am angry. And I'm angry because I have seen white people create jobs to hire their children, to hire their friends' children, to hire their aunts, their uncles. I'm talking about create jobs where none existed. I have seen white people terminate people to be able to hire their sisters and their kids and their friends in that person's place. I've seen them mobilize to protect each other. And as I'm listening to this white woman tell me about her Black best friend, who's been sitting next to her since 2018, 2019, on a podcast talking about all things diversity, tell me that she has landed softly in a cushy job and her Black friend is unemployed. And it just made me ask, what does white womanhood prioritize? Is it safety and power over community and friendship? Is proximity to Black women only emotional but not material? How do you go to bed at night knowing that you have a paycheck, that you landed softly, and your friend, your bestie, I didn't give her that title, you told me that's what she was to you, is unemployed? Unemployed. And after she tells me her bestie is unemployed, she tells me all the different things she's doing to basically try to make it work. And dare I say, as a person who has taught empathy, studied empathy, can tell when people are engaged with empathy, there was zero empathy emitting from this woman for her friend who has been unemployed. Unemployed, and I want to be very clear here. We are unemployed by whiteness. Black women, Black men, those of us in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, we are unemployed by whiteness, the very identity she occupies, the very identity that gives her power within the society, not just power in her white body, but power in her material world. And rather than take any of that power to help her Black bestie, she sits on a podcast with her Black bestie, interviewing other Black women about diversity? What is the point of talking about diversity if you in your actual relationships don't live and model it? What do you want your audience to take away from any conversations you could be having? Why do you think your responsibility as a white woman, as a white person in friendship with Black people doesn't hold levels of responsibility? As a straight woman, I have a level of responsibility in friendship with my gay friends. There is responsibility in being in friendships if you are a white person in a society with both physical power and material power. And if you don't have the ability, if you don't have the care to use any of that power to help in real time in your immediate world, to help the Black person in your immediate world, why would I think you as a white person would do anything to help me as a Black person who is not in your immediate world? If I'm friends with gay people and I have power within my straightness, within my feminine self, and I decide that the gay people in my life, I won't use any of that power to help them or protect them. Why would any gay person listening to me teach about empathy, talk about empathy, think I would have any for them when they're not in my material world? So this conversation, this question is for white people and white women. And I want to leave you with this question. Is your proximity to Black women simply emotional, but not material? Do you think all you have to be to your Black girlfriend is a good time, a laugh, a kiki, a brunch? But any of your material wealth, any of your material power, you don't have to share? You don't have to care? You don't have to extend? But this is what happens when inclusivity and diversity becomes branding and proximity to Blackness without the responsibility to it. And so if you are a white woman watching this show, I want you to think about the Black people, the Black women in your life. Because we don't need you just to love us emotionally. Can you love us economically? Can you love us economically? Can you share your resources? Can you share your power? I said this on TikTok, and I'm going to say this here. Whiteness is extractive of Black bodies. Blackness is redemptive of all bodies. Black people are always trying to make the people whole, because I will guarantee that that Black woman is sitting on that podcast with this white woman because she is speaking to the other Black women that was her in those diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces, feeling absolutely alone. But the truth is, she's sitting with a friend who really ain't her friend, and she is just as alone as the Black women she's speaking to.
Thank you for watching Pyro Media Network. For more information, please visit pyromedianetwork.com.